Last week, our reading for the week, toward the end of it, included, as I've already indicated to you, the Shema. And at that point, it hit home. It stirred and moved us, or at least it should have. And now, this week, we wait with anticipation for what's next. What more does God have to say to us? And so this week's parsha begins, V'aya hekev tishma'u. But just what does that mean? What does it intend for us? Now, unfortunately, far too often this text is completely misunderstood. Now, here's a representative commentary I read by one rabbi just yesterday. My third grade art teacher was a terror. Her rules were ironclad and disobedience was severely punished. Quick to lose her temper, she once grabbed a paintbrush from me and, critiquing the stars I had sketched in my rendition of the night sky, painted directly over them. One day, as the class was gathered around, watching her at the demonstration table, I realized that I needed to go to the bathroom. But I knew the rules. No leaving the room without permission. No interrupting the demonstration, and no raising your hand unless the teacher asked a question. Parshat Ekev for me is brutal. The crush of God, the if-then God of wrath and punishment, is overbearing. The choice that God offers in our parsha is not a choice. And if you obey these rules and observe them carefully, the Lord your God will maintain faithfully for you the covenant that he made on oath with your fathers. He will favor you and bless you. Reads Deuteronomy 7:12-13. On the other hand, it goes on, if you do forget the Lord your God and follow other gods to serve them or bow down to them, I warn you this day that you will certainly perish. Deuteronomy 8:19. The rabbi goes on, the God of Ekev expects us to respond to an if-then choice, which is not a choice at all, but is rather a display of raw power. Bear in mind, Deuteronomy 8:5, that the Lord your God disciplines you just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore keep the commandments of the Lord your God, walk in his ways, and revere him. By the way, that is a much better translation than fear. But continue with the rabbi's commentary. Reading Ekev, I can't help but feel the way I did in that third grade art class, constrained by the narrowness of the rules and left wondering what room there is for me to ask questions, to take care of my own needs, or paint stars of a different sort, end quote. And friends, this is precisely how not only this rabbi, but especially many Christian commentators and most Christians, as well as many Jews, tend to view this text and the God of this text. God is seen as the cosmic enforcer, as the mean old school principal. Not long ago, young Eddie was doing very badly in math. His Jewish parents had tried everything: tutors, mentors, flashcards, special learning centers, everything they could think of to help in math. And finally, in a last-ditch effort, they took little Eddie and enrolled him in a local Catholic school. After the first day, little Eddie came home with a very, very serious look on his face. He didn't even kiss his mother hello. Instead, he went straight to his room and started studying. Books and papers were spread all over his room, and little Eddie was hard at work. His mother was completely amazed. She called him down to dinner. To her shock, the minute he was done, he marched back to his room without a word and was back to studying, as hard as before. Now, this went on day after day, while the mother tried to understand what had made a difference. And then finally, Eddie brought home his report card. He quietly laid it on the table, went back up to his room, and hit the books yet again. His mother looked at the card, and to her great surprise, little Eddie had gotten an A in math. Well, now she could no longer contain her curiosity, so she went up to his room and said, "Son, what made the difference? What was it? Was it the nuns?" Little Eddie looked at her and shook his head, "No." Well, then she replied, "Was it the books, the discipline, the structure, the uniforms? What was it?" Her glum-looking little Jewish son just looked at her and said, "Well, On the first day of school, when I saw that guy nailed to the plus sign, I knew they weren't fooling around. But friends, far too often that is the way in which we view God as well. And those who look at this text and similar texts come away with the same impression. Now in a few minutes, we'll look yet again at our parashah from a completely different perspective. And in doing so, we'll discover that the common viewpoint on this text is not what the author intended. This is not our God. But first, the rabbi goes on to share an important insight, and I want to share that as well with you. The rabbi goes on to say there are times when we need a commanding God, when we need the structure of a God who enforces rules to get us through a particularly wild stretch of life. There are other times when we feel rebellious, when we know what God would expect of us, but also have a need to not do that, to stretch the limits of our relationship to God. There are times when we assert our will, and there are times to surrender in deep humility to that which is so much larger and more awesome than we are. Many situations demand that we hold on to both at once. This is why the Shema, the backbone of our liturgy, which we are encouraged to recite daily, contains both a passage from Parshat Ekev, tonight's selection, in its purest reward and punishment choice that really is in a choice form, and the V'ahavta passage, the enlarged Shema, from last week, commanding us to love God as well. We need both. Onkelos, the first century translator of Torah into Aramaic, chose an unusual word for Ekev, which is usually translated as if. Onkelos instead translated as chalaf, meaning in exchange for, opening up the distinct possibility that if-then is not all there is to these passages. Nachmanides, the Ramban, in his commentary on Deuteronomy 7:12, takes Onkelos' translation as the grounds for a new interpretation, and he says, Onkelos thus made it an expression of roundabout, the end result of a series of events, derived from the verse, and Hey Akov, the crooked shall be made straight. That is, the winding road that goes roundabout will become a straight and level path. End quote. In other words, what the rabbi is reminding us of is that life is a journey, and God knows full well that our road will have numerous bends and curves and turns in it. He understands that, and he understands our response in those times. And remember also that, as this rabbi pointed out, but I would look at it in a different way, that Deuteronomy 8:5 is part of our context in our reading this week, intentionally so, where the text reads, bear in mind, or perhaps better, know in your heart, again, that has to do with more of an emotional and love response, know in your heart that the Lord your God disciplines you as a father does his child. And so even in the disciplinary area, as the author of the commentary in the book of Hebrews reminds us, it is done as a parent does for a child. And that's a different relationship than a cosmic enforcer and that mean old schoolmaster. Now, as frequently translated, Deuteronomy 7:12 and 13 reads, if you pay attention to these laws and you're careful to follow them, then the Lord your God will keep his covenant of love with you, as he swore to your ancestors. He will love you and bless you. Now, although often translated if, this term is far richer than its usual translations. In fact, it's not even the normal Hebrew word for if. That term is im. Actually, Ekev is far better, much better translated because or when. The idea here in this text then appears to be encouragement, namely that the people, we, will in fact follow God's instructions, and therefore we will reap the benefits that God has already committed himself to lavishing on us. And beyond that, according to several rabbinic commentators, there's also a suggestion or a connotation of reward inherent in this wording here in the term Ekev. So the thought, as found in our text more fully, if you unwrap the text, is here's the reward whenever you pay attention to these guidelines. And then appropriately, later on in the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 28, this same idea is then reinforced when Moses lists the many blessings that God will literally rain down on his people whenever they follow him. And in our parsha, the rewards are great as well. He will love you. He will bless you. Now, if you reflect for a while on these words, interestingly, you will find that they sound almost identical to Yeshua's statements in the Gospels recorded for us by Yochanan HaShliach, John 14:21, where he says, "Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he or she is the one who loves me. And he or she who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love and show myself to him or to her." Now that, my friends, is the ultimate in blessing. God's living, vital presence actuated in our lives. And in fact, there's a very strong likelihood that Yeshua is actually referring to Akev at this point in that gospel. Now, interestingly, there's a further dimension to the term Akev. It also means heal. Heal. On the significance of this meaning, the Art Scroll Chumash perceptively notes the following, and I quote, "Midrashically, the word Akev alludes to the sort of commandments that people may regard as relatively unimportant, so they tend figuratively to tread on them with their heels. Thus the Torah assures Israel that if they are careful to observe even these neglected, these least of the commandments, they can be certain that God